Shabbat Shalom. Let us welcome Chancellor Julio Frenk and Associate Chancellor Felicia Knaul. First of all, I am not going to read both of their really extraordinarily impressive bios, but I will say a word. Julio Frenk became the 7th Chancellor of UCLA in 2025. He was President of the University of Miami. He was Dean of the Harvard School of Public Health, and also Dr. Knaul got her PhD from Harvard, which I would like you to not hold against them both. But also Chancellor Frenk has his degree from the National University of Mexico and a Master's of Public Health and a PhD from the University of Michigan. He's published very, very widely and quoted widely in health journals, but also, by the way, has written children's novels about health that have explained the function of the human body, the first of which has been in print continuously since 1978, which is a very impressive accomplishment. Dr. Knaul, before coming to UCLA, served as the Director for the Advanced Study of the Americas and Director of the Office of Hemispheric and Global Affairs at the University of Miami. And she was Professor of the university's Leonard M. Miller School of Medicine. She, too, has published, especially 2 books chronicling her own cancer journey, and continues to shape global dialogue through her service on Lancet commissions focused on violence against women and children and cancer in health systems. So these are people who have their metaphorical finger in many pies, but also are incredibly important both in our community and in the educational discussion nationwide. Now, every time I interview someone, people call me up and say, I hope you're going to ask this. But I must say, before this interview, the phone rang off the hook with, I hope you're going to ask this. I am not Mike Wallace. This is not 60 Minutes. My job is to hear from our guests, and I hope at the end we'll have time for a few questions. But I hope that we are here primarily to learn, because I will say one thing just by way of, which is running an institution is a very, very different enterprise from being on the outside of an institution thinking what it's doing wrong. And I say this just as a synagogue rabbi. I know when I was an academic and a professor has no constituency but him or herself, I had no idea what it was to try to keep a community together, which is the primary job of the head of an institution. So let's understand that even though we are deeply concerned about anti-Semitism at a university, that cannot be the only concern of the people who run the university. And when we ask about it, let's understand that balancing acts are part of the nature of running any institution before we say all the things that we are now going to ask. And I'm going to start with, why in the world would you take the presidency or the chancellorship of a major university at such a time? What persuaded you to? And had I been your father, I would have said, don't do it. Right, exactly.
Thank you, Rabbi Wolpe. First of all, thank you for the invitation. You are a highly respected, not just rabbi, but intellectual, and I respect you. Also, a former faculty member at UCLA. We're very proud to have had you there, and so thank you, and thank you to all the community at Temple Sinai. I'm very honored for this opportunity, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone. It's a question that I've been asked many times. I was at the University of Miami on my 9th year, and I had agreed to stay for 10 years. I was in my final year. My 10th year also coincided with the centennial, so we had a big celebration, and I had finished my fundraising campaign, and I had gotten the university through the pandemic. That's my specialty, public health, so we were able to keep the university open safely.
Can you hear in the back? I just want to make sure. If you can put it a little closer to your mouth so they can hear in the back.
So I was not looking for a job, and higher education in the United States has become so disrupted that every month, literally, at least once a month, I was getting an email from a search firm telling me about such and such university searching for a new president. Would I be interested? And I didn't even read those messages because I was really focused on finishing my 10 years. Until one day I received the email, and I usually would just glance at them and delete them. But this time, before I deleted it, fortunately, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the 4 letters, UCLA. And UCLA is one of the most highly regarded and recognized brands, if we may use that language, in higher education around the world. I grew up in Mexico City, and I remember as a young, even boy, or certainly as a young person, people will, in Spanish you pronounce every letter. So UCLA is actually UCLA, and nouns are gendered, and UCLA is a feminine, it ends in an A. So everyone talks about la UCLA. La UCLA is like something, it's like a word. And so I grew up hearing about la UCLA. Of course, Los Angeles is an iconic city. California is a big part of the imagination of Mexico. There was a long period of time, actually most of the history of California. We belong to the same political unit, the Spanish Empire first, and then the brief period of the Mexican Republic before California joined the United States. So, I was interested in the place, Los Angeles, and I was interested. So that email, I did respond, and then the rest, as they say, is history. I ended up coming here. I did accept the job, but my appointment had not been announced when the tragic events on campus happened the last day of April and the first days of May of 2024. And I was asked by people from the university, because I could still back out, basically. And I was asked, I hope you're not going to change your mind, because I saw what we all saw on the screens, very disturbing signs of anti-Semitism, an encampment where things that should have never happened, and then acts of violence on a campus, on a university campus. And that's the one thing that universities cannot have. Universities were invented so that humans can process their differences through the use of reason and dialogue, never through the use of violence and hatred. And we were seeing hatred and violence in a university campus. So it was very disturbing, but I frankly saw all of that and I said, there's a reason there for me to go and take that job. And so I came very determined that, I wasn't thinking, despite my, at that point, very long career, I wasn't thinking of a place where I was just going to coast and cut ribbons. I don't like those kinds of jobs. And I have never had one of those jobs. So actually what happened on campus was a motivation for me, and I have made it my priority to try to do exactly what you said, Rabbi. The main role of a leader is to bring the community together, and that was not a community that was very joined at that point.
Dr. Knaul, why'd you come along?
There was a point where I wasn't sure I would, but it was nothing to do, actually, with what we all saw on screen in April of that year. So first I'll share, I was actually at a meeting at the University of Edinburgh, and I turn on CNN in the morning, and I see this, and I think, what has my husband decided to do? And no one knew other than one friend who immediately called me from the room and said, what has Julio decided to do? And the reason I say, did I go along? That isn't exactly how it worked out. I actually made a deliberate choice to come several months after Julio had already started, because of the amazing support and offers to work at UCLA Health and at the David Geffen School of Medicine that I received from leadership at the university, for which I'm very grateful. But I will go back to the question at hand by sharing that, I'm the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. My father spent 5 years in the Nazi concentration camp from age 15 to 20. I started my career working with street children in Guatemala because they were the same age and suffering in different ways, but suffering. And he taught us that suffering of any kind was suffering that we had to work to alleviate. And coming to UCLA and being at UCLA has made me again understand what my father's teachings taught us and the family and what it truly means to bear witness. He escaped Dachau 2 days before Dachau was liberated, having been branded in Auschwitz. My grandparents were murdered there. In fact, we just shared yahrzeit for all three of them, actually. And he wrote that hiding somewhere in Germany in a river, he wanted to go into that river and not come out. And he writes, and his prose is much better than I'll share it, but he wrote that what drew him out of that river was the determination to bear witness. I grew up with that. That's my family history. And so what we live on campus now, or any kind of hatred towards any people, is what I was taught through the suffering of our people and the suffering of my family to work against. And I'm blessed to have the opportunity to be able to give, they say in Spanish, un grano de arena, a little bit back from what he taught me working at UCLA. So that's why.
How many of you have either been a student, a faculty member, or a contributor to UCLA? Okay, so we have a UCLA, I, by the way, should raise my hand too, or have a child at UCLA. I not only taught there, but my daughter got her PhD there and is right now doing a postdoc there, so we are very invested in the campus. And I would say that part of the concern, before we even get to the manifestations of anti-Semitism, is the sources of it. I know that when I was on the commission at Harvard, what we saw was Middle Eastern money, Russian ideology, lots of things are feeding into anti-Semitism on campus. How do you see those influences either at or trying to get at our campus?
Yeah, it is a complex picture. Of course, there's been anti-Semitism. It's the longest continuously operating form of prejudice and hatred, and the most widely distributed geographically. But I think we are in this era of social media, of misinformation. The spread of hatred is much more complex to combat. So I do think we need to be determined, and I agree with everything you said. This is clearly, there's a lot of external influence. But to me, I think the North Star has been to focus on that concept that, universities, one of their social roles is to create a mechanism to process differences. And that's why, through dialogue and reason, and not through hatred and violence. That's why on my third week, I started, by the way, in January of 2025. And because I wasn't looking for a job, I did have a transition period of about 5 months where I came every month for a week. So, I mean, everyone I spoke said, this is what you need to focus on. You got to fix the polarization in the community, and particularly as it manifests itself through anti-Semitism. On my third week after January 1st, my first challenge was the wildfires. So on my second day in the office, the wildfires erupted. That gave me an opportunity, first of all, to be introduced much more rapidly to the community, because my experience with dealing with a lot of emergencies, you need to communicate often so that people know what's going on. So people got to know me much better. I also saw a lot of the good things in UCLA during the emergency, because I saw, first of all, a large number of our own community had terrible losses. About 200 people lost their homes, and about 2,000 people were affected directly by the wildfires. The level of solidarity and support and the desire to help the community was manifest, and that for me was very illuminating. Coming out of that, into my third week, we had an act of violence by the two Students for Justice in Palestine, two acts of violence in the home of a regent of the University of the University of California, the system-wide Board of Regents, who happens to be Jewish, Jay Surs. I'm sure many of you know him. And that was when I decided that we couldn't let that just go on. So I decided to ban Students for Justice in Palestine on my third week.
You can applaud here.
Thank you.
Which I have to say was, I mean, there are a lot of campuses that could have done that did not do it, and the fact that you did that was noticed and appreciated, and I think had a big national effect. Please go ahead.
Then the other thing was that part of what happened was the structure was not very well. There was a long series of bureaucratic steps between what was happening on campus on the ground and the chancellor making a decision. So we restructured that, and my first recruitment was the person who's leading a new position that was created, which is an associate vice chancellor for campus and community safety, because we're also very much embedded in this community, this area. So it's campus and community safety. And I recruited an extraordinary person, Steve Lurie, a Bruin in his undergraduate, also a lawyer, and with a law degree, he decided to go into law enforcement, 30 years serving in the LAPD, and he, for most of those years, was the liaison of the Los Angeles Police Department with the Jewish community. He also happened to be the commander of the zone where the campus is, so he was there during the encampments. And we immediately, I said, we are going to change the rules. We, of course, are committed to assuring freedom of expression, but like every freedom, that freedom has guardrails. The rights of anyone to express end where the rights of others begin. And this is the way we can act in a civilized way. So he's been a partner. We've set up a wholly revamped Office for Campus and Community Safety, and that has made a difference. The second thing we agreed on is that, to the entire team, we're an educational institution. A lot of what happened, not just at UCLA, but in many universities, was, the administration, okay, well, they're students, let it be. No, one of the values we need to teach our students is that it's paramount to respect the rule of law. If you don't like the laws, thank you. If you don't like the laws and you live in a democracy, you have vehicles to try to change that. But when the law is there, whether you like it or not, you have to abide by it. So I told my team, if we have students violating our own policies and the law, and we do nothing, we're committing an act of educational malpractice, because we're teaching them something that is not going to serve them when they go into the real world and find out that that's not the way the world works. So we've been very clear. You can express yourself, you can say things, but these are the rules, these are the time, place, and manner. There are some expressions, particularly hate expressions, that are not permitted. These are the rules. If you stay within those, we're okay. If you diverge from that, there will be action, there will be disciplinary action, and just being consistent in that has made a difference. It's not a finished job, but I think we are making some progress.
Boy, I have so many questions, but I also want to leave time, I know, for your questions. So let me ask just a couple more, and then maybe we can open it up. Also, I know we have a lot of people here who are involved in this. Soraya Nazarian is sitting in the front row, and of course the Unison Soraya Nazarian Institute is the one that does Israel education on campus. And I got a call just yesterday from Judea Pearl, who also is a sort of adjunct member of our community and speaks, as you know, so highly of you. And that's a pretty good endorsement from Judea Pearl. But I think the two or three that I want to ask about, one is a general question. Just in general, how do you think we should think about agitation against Israel and Zionism as impacting anti-Semitism in general? Like, on a university campus, it may be different from the way we think about it in the world, but I'm leaving that open for both of you for any thoughts.
So I think we should talk about and share a recent event that probably many of you heard about. Asher Shem Tov came and spoke on Yom HaShoah. And Julio and I opened that amazing event because it was Yom HaShoah, sharing our family's history. And then he spoke, and I don't know how many of you have heard him speak, but he's a gifted speaker with a cause and a belief and a strength that is quite impressive, incredible, and has gone through a horrific experience. And this was organized by some of our students who are part of Students Supporting Israel. And I have the incredible opportunity to be their mentor, their faculty mentor. They didn't have a faculty mentor. And when I met them 6 or 8 months ago, I thought, you might just need one along the way, because this is going to be a difficult pathway. And I'm sure some of you have read about the unfortunate, to use a small word for something that was absolutely horrific, letter that was shared. Well, it turns out that...
You want to just say a quick word for those who don't know what you're talking about with the letter, just what it was with it.
A letter was then actually written while that event was taking place, and it came from some of the members of student government, undergraduate student government. And this was an extraordinarily inappropriate letter. You may be able to, I could use other words. We was Shabbat. I'll be careful about the words I use on Shabbat. I'll put it that way. But the story goes as follows, that one of the members of student government who was not there at that meeting was one of the women who had organized this event, right? Shem Tov, because she was obviously at the event with us. And she found out about the letter several days after it had been written and circulated. And the question was, you wrote this letter, you signed it with great cowardice as representing a group, many of whom were not there to be part of the discussion about the letter, right? And she was one of them. But at the next council meeting, which was 1 week later, she stood up and she read an incredibly gifted and thoughtful and beautiful and Jewish response to this, where she shared many things, but one of the things that she shared that truly moved me, and I did not help her to write the letter, I offered to, she had written it on her own. She said, "We welcome personal testimony from anyone who has suffered if they want to share personal testimony, because we will learn and grow, and we will know how to better support anyone who has suffered an injustice, a human rights violation, by listening and hearing." And she invited other communities, right, students who support other communities, to bring forward those who might want to share their suffering and their testimony. And that, for me, spoke to what is a Jewish student leader in our campus, right? And she's amazing, but there are many amazing students like this. They teach us, they uplift us, they help us. And, those are the influencers. And I think they're making a huge difference. And they have the courage now and the space to be able to speak up, perhaps in ways they didn't have before or they don't have on other campuses. And I don't want to speak for the chancellor. I never do, not allowed to. But if I could speak for the chancellor, I'd say we are committed to making sure that those spaces are there for safety, for our students, all students, to be able to stand up in ways that support the values of what at least I consider I was taught as a Jew.
Just before you answer, just because I'm interested in the dynamics of marriage, I know you can't speak for the chancellor. Are you allowed to speak for Julio?
Is Julio allowed to speak for Felicia? I am careful.
Sure.
I am careful. I never speak for him, no. But I think in this we speak with one voice. And going back to some, the earlier question, what did the wife say? We had no choice but to do this because of what our families lived. So in that, I think we speak with one voice.
Absolutely.
But I don't get to make the decisions of who is banned and who is not banned. That is the role of the chancellor.
Anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism.
Yeah.
How do you see it?
There's this idea that, anti-Semitism is not anti-Semitic. The way I explain my position is very simple. Of course, criticism of a government of the State of Israel is not anti-Semitism per se. In fact, many citizens of the State of Israel criticize a government, including the current government. What I've only observed in the case of Israel is that quickly criticism of the Netanyahu government, in this case, quickly morphs into criticism of Israel. Suddenly the words, and you stop talking about the government, and then it's Israel who's doing this or who's doing that or who's responsible. And then quickly it morphs into the Jews. I don't see that with any other group. Putin attacks Ukraine. No one's starting saying all of Russia is attacking Ukraine. And certainly no one would think of saying that all Russians, including those that are not even citizens of the country, are to be blamed for that. That is anti-Semitism. And to me, that form of attack of Zionism is clearly anti-Semitic. So that's the way I interpret that, and the uniqueness of the Jewish state and the Jewish people in this expanding wave of condemnation from a government to a state, which, by the way, 20% of its citizens are not Jewish and are citizens of the State of Israel, and then to the entire Jewish people, that to me is the core of that conversation.
And before I open it up for questions, because I know that there are questions, I thought I should just give you an opportunity to just talk about the university. So you're both are new to the university relatively. What have you discovered about it? What do you love about it? What do you want to tell us about UCLA that you didn't know before you got there?
So, I can compare UCLA to having worked at universities in Mexico, in Miami, and, the H word, Harvard, where I also worked, in addition to getting my PhD. What has characterized UCLA for me is it is so collaborative. It is a place of excellence in so many different fields, but the essence of it is that people want to collaborate with each other. Our faculty want to work together. So it's not the battle of, will the anthropologist speak with the physician? It's how do we facilitate that conversation across our campus and all of the UC campuses. And that, in today's world, is a huge strength because we have the opportunity to learn so much faster and so much more than we ever did before, and to be able to work in an interdisciplinary space where we can take advantage of knowledge that comes from all of our schools, that I can work with engineering and law and the business school and all of the different aspects of the college. That's a gift. And that, for me, has been one of my most important experiences at UCLA. And the other has been what I shared about some of these truly, I would call the influencer students that speak to me about what it is to be a Bruin. They teach me.
You know, I knew about the preeminence of UCLA before I came. I just mentioned about La UCLA. But I have really been pleasantly surprised at just the level of excellence. And I'm talking both faculty and students. This incident that Felicia described, what angers me is that these were 10 students. It was a statement of an incredible degree of lack of minimal empathy. I mean, here you have a young man their age who just survived 500 days as a hostage, 400 of them in a tunnel, in darkness, in solitary. You know, you don't need to think a lot about whether he's Jewish or he's this or the other identity. There ought to be. Now, these are 10 students, not even the entirety of the student government, because even the president of student government was not present, didn't vote for that. And 10 students have this incredible, very justified outrage, but that, again, suddenly people think that is representative of UCLA. It is not representative of UCLA. Similarly with the faculty. You mentioned Julia Pearl. I knew of Julia. Julia Pearl, now that everyone talks about AI, is one of the fathers of all the statistical reasoning that underlies large machine learning and large language models. I mean, he's also a man who suffered the undescribable in the murder, the execution of his son. Now that I've had the opportunity to talk to him, I mean, not just the depth of his intellect, he's one of the most intelligent human beings I have ever met in my life, and I have met many very intelligent people. He's also a man of a level of integrity and depth, but that's our faculty. I don't want us to be characterized by a small minority, some of them with some of the elements and ties that you described at the beginning, that believe that the university is a space for indoctrination and activism. I'm all for activism, but society has invented other mechanisms. There are political parties, political associations. Universities are places for the cultivation of the mind and for the development of young people as people who can make a difference in their society and for the advancement of science, not for promoting a biased ideology. So that's our challenge. How do we deal with the greatness, which is what characterizes the vast majority of UCLA, while acknowledging that we have a few members of that community and we will try to bring them in, but we also need to set very clear boundaries that some behaviors are not acceptable.
And can I just add one thing? You may not have said, so Julio, your chancellor, would not tolerate hate to be stored anybody. It's not acceptable, not only towards Jewish people, it is not acceptable to any people. It is not an acceptable way to behave on campus or anywhere else. And so you wouldn't have tolerated it to any group. And so that is across the board and fair. And that's what I think are the Jewish values, right, that we're applying. It isn't only because it's against our people. It's because it's wrong against any people.
Okay, I have more questions, but I don't want to stifle. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to make one quick point of clarification, which is if you want to analogize the war in Ukraine to the war in Israel, Netanyahu would be Zelensky, not Putin, and it's an important point. The question is, though...
No, he was talking, well...
I know exactly what he's talking about, but
anyway, let's not litigate that, okay? You understand the point, right?
Right, but the point is, are you going to go against the people who are attacked or the attacker? So I just keep coming back to 3 presidents with completely straight faces telling Congress it depends on the context, and it doesn't. I'm wondering if there has been some sort of coordinated strategy across universities in America for dealing with this problem.
Has there been a coordinated strategy across universities in America to deal with this problem?
I don't think there's been a coordinated, I mean, I can tell you, there's not been a coordinated strategy. People are realizing, and that testimony before Congress of the three presidents, which was a sad day for higher education, all of them women, very, very distinguished in their fields, but they exhibit a level of relativism that I think cost two of them their jobs, and that was I think a very low point for higher education, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to own that. I don't think denying that serves anyone, and we need to face it head on. Let me use your question to say something I like to say, and I've written something in the Jewish Telegraph on this small piece. There are three reasons why universities need to combat anti-Semitism. The first is to protect Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Obviously, the first and most important is the first reason. But the second is to protect the non-Jewish students, faculty, and staff. Because once you let one form of hatred become normalized in a community, every group is at risk. The third reason is to save the university. And I give a historic example, which is very close to my family, who had to escape Germany in the 1930s, escaping anti-Semitism. 100 years ago, the level of global preeminence that American universities have today was occupied by German universities and the University of Vienna, which is in Austria. If there had been rankings, there were no rankings. But if you look today at the global rankings still, and we need to make sure that continues to be the case, 15 of the top 20 universities in the world are American universities. If there had been rankings 100 years ago in the 1920s and 30s, 15 of the top 20 would have been German and Austrian universities. Today, there is not one single German or Austrian university in that list. There are fine universities in both countries, but not one in the top 20 on the world. That incredible level of global decline, of declining the global standing, started with anti-Semitism. It led to the escape of their most talented people, including those that helped win the war against the Nazis, people like Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein and all the Jewish physicists who came to this country and helped win the war. But more importantly, that's the obvious way, but the most important way is anti-Semitism corrupted the soul of universities. All the pseudoscience that led to the Nuremberg laws, the racist laws, that was pseudoscience carried out in universities. And for me, as a physician, the worst example in human history of a breach of medical ethics, which was the experiments on human beings carried out on concentration camp prisoners, those were carried out by professors, the revered professors of medicine in the German universities. So anti-Semitism destroyed the soul of universities. The films we've all seen of books burning, those are videos or films taken in universities. Those are the books from the university libraries that they were burning. It destroyed the soul of the university. So I say we need to combat anti-Semitism to save universities. In addition to protecting our students, Jewish and everyone else, it's to save the university. And that is, and I've said this time and again, because I do think we need to focus it with a high level of attention and priority.
And if I can just recommend, there's an incredible report by The Lancet that we presented.
The Lancet is a British medical journal.
Big British medical journal.
Big British medical journal.
But they did an incredible, many things, but they did an incredible report on Nazism, medicine, and the Holocaust that actually published just 30 days after October 7th, by chance, because it was many years before. We had the honor of having two of the authors present it on also the day before Yom HaShoah. But I highly recommend it because it is such an incredible, excellent piece of work and research around exactly what Julio said. But the others, I did want to mention that UCLA and 70 odd other universities are part of the AAU, the American Association of Universities. We are the majority of the research universities in North America, in this case, Canada and the United States. And we are beginning to have a set of conversations with some of those universities to learn from each other about what we're doing to combat anti-Semitism. And one of the universities, and I say this as a Canadian, alma mater for undergraduate is the University of Toronto, that has been one of the most heinous places at levels of leadership, including the Dean of Dentistry, you can look it up, is working to make incredible change in a very serious way with the president who has recently taken office. So we are actually working together to begin to sort of codify what we've done and what's worked and what hasn't.
Also, since everything good ultimately starts at Sinai Temple, those of you who remember Dr. Alfred Pasternak, he wrote a very painful book about medicine in the camps. So you can also check that out. Yes, one and then two, and then we'll move to this side.
Thank you each for being here. Can you comment on JFROG, the Jewish Faculty Resilience Group, in terms of its impact and relationship you have with it?
Sure. I don't know where you are sitting, so okay. Thank you for the question. Yes, precisely, we were at the presentation of this. Lancet is the most influential medical journal in the world, and this commission report on medicine, Nazism, and the Holocaust, which is where I drew inspiration for the comment I made. And there were several members, because JFROG was started at the medical school at UCLA, and they were there, and that's where we started our conversation. This was actually in October, before I even I began my tenure as chancellor. So we've been talking with them in many occasions. We've had a lot of conversations with them, and I think they are a very important voice in this fight. It doesn't represent all the Jewish faculty, but it represents a very substantial part of the Jewish faculty. They've also been very helpful in another action that I've been able to take, which is to make sure that we facilitate the reporting of incidents, because that's I should have said that also I created an initiative to combat anti-Semitism very early in my tenure, and it came out with 3 recommendations, and they just published their final report with actions, but we started acting before. One is to improve education, and obviously we need to keep doing that and continue to educate people about what is anti-Semitism, but also 2 other very immediate recommendations. One is to improve reporting structures. And the university had an Office of Civil Rights, but never hired a Title VI or Title VII officer. And for those of you who don't know the civil rights law, which includes myself, I'm not a lawyer, but I do know enough to know that Title VI respects the civil rights of students in institutions of higher education, and Title VII of employees, including our faculty. So we've now hired a head of the office and a Title VI, Title VII officer. And that is helping us now to encourage both students and the faculty, including members of JFRAG, some of whom have actually sued UCLA, which is fine, but we're hoping that there will be more effective reporting, and that's being completely changed now so that people know where they can go and their investigation is carried out in a prompt way. The third recommendation is, of course, to enforce the rules, and that's where my hiring of Steve Lurie and the restructuring of that office had a lot to do. But they're a valuable member, very valuable member of our community.
And many of you said you have students from your families who are currently, we need their help and your help. So now there is a space to be able to make complaints and to register grievances. an important space. And we need our students to take the time and have the courage, and I know it can be painful and difficult, to make those reports. Because without the reports, we don't have the evidence that we need to evoke as much change as we can evoke. And I know some of the Jewish students who have come to speak to me, they're not comfortable necessarily standing up. They need to stand up, they need to report, and we will protect them when they do so. So please, this is something I'm going to ask you to help us with all of the youth members of this community.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. We've met before. We have a son coming in the fall, and we have a son who is a senior, will be a senior in the fall. So I wanted to thank you, and this is more of an observation, not a question, but I really wanted to say that I definitely see a difference since you both came in from the previous years till now. And I think that the difference is that you work together beautifully as a team, and I think that that's very unique and very powerful. And it reminds me of, there's a line in the Parsha, I think this week's Parsha, where God says to Moses, and you will make 2 silver trumpets. And I think that it makes me think that you're like these 2 beautiful silver trumpets, which each has a unique voice, but together is just this very powerful, strong, beautiful symphony. So I really want to thank you for all of your efforts.
And I'll bet.
That's the nicest thing anybody has said about
I'll bet
about
you
the
don't
two
get
of us.
that at a faculty
No,
meeting.
it means we can't bicker anymore at
Right.
home. That's what it means.
Right here in the 3rd row, Amanda. In the 3rd row, Carrie, stand up. Stand up, Carrie. Thanks.
Thank you, Drs. Frenk. I can't quote scripture, but anyhow, there was a recent article in the Jerusalem Post about people in England and Canada afraid and delaying health care because of their Judaism, removing their stars, and I've been to a national meeting recently, and some of my colleagues are afraid to do that. I don't know if that's happened at UCLA, but I will relay a story that my daughter is a new doctor there, and she's a fellow in infertility, and she was at a meeting there, and they were pushing the union, and she thought it was didn't feel right to her, sort of undertones of anti-Israel, and she felt very uncomfortable, certainly did not want to go to anybody and say anything, but here's an example of that. So relaying this to you, I don't know if you saw it there, but there are people that will remove their Star of David because of fear of retribution, faculty and patients.
Yes, it is true, and we're trying to send a message that they don't need to. Title VI allows us, in the case of students, and 7 in the case of employees, to also make reports of hostile work or learning environment. And that's a category. Of course, if there is, some of the things that sadly happened during the encampments, like students not being allowed to get into classrooms unless they denied Zionism, and I think you also some of those videos. That was clearly illegal. There was a lawsuit. One of the things I said at the beginning, they were saying, well, we should appeal. I said, we are not going to appeal. We're going to atone. We're going to recognize that that was wrong. It should have never happened, and we settled that and paid money, mostly to community organizations, to fight anti-Semitism. But anyone who feels that they are compelled to remove any sign of Jewish identity, or as Felicia said, any sign of identity, but we're talking about Jewish identity, should not do that, because there are now mechanisms. If anyone says anything or does anything aggressive of any kind, there is a mechanism for reporting that. And that includes students who sometimes face some of this very small minority of professors, but who give us a terrible reputation, and who are afraid, because obviously as a student you are in a subordinate position. That professor will grade you. So that's a particularly vulnerable situation where you may be tempted to do that. But they have a way out. I've also seen, of course, the opposite. Jewish students, including our daughter, who is much more proud now to wear ostensibly her Star of David or other signs of her identity, because exactly what's going on. But we want to encourage everyone to take advantage of the institutional element we now have to report anything that would be perceived as aggressive behavior.
And she should write to me, fknaul@ucla.edu. I'm a member of that community, and I speak to the students individually, and so please have her reach out. Our older daughter in Toronto has shared with me that she is afraid sometimes on the street to wear her Magen David. So it isn't unique to here. But people can't change their skin color, they can't change the shape of their face. So we could hide our Stars of David, but what are we doing by doing so to all those people who have no way to hide who they are and should never have to do so? That's our belief in what it means to be Jewish. But please have her reach out, because we need her to report.
Hi, I don't, in light of what you've already said, I don't know if my question is relevant or not, but I read very recently that that the federal government has sued UCLA 3 times. Can you speak to the status of those lawsuits?
Sure. I cannot speak to the status of the lawsuits because it's a legal matter, but I can tell you about the lawsuits we've received. When we received the first one, which was not a lawsuit but was a threat of a lawsuit, and was accompanied by the cancellation of 800 grants, research grants, 500 of those by the National Institutes of Health, mostly research carried out in our medical school, and then 300 in other parts of the university. I did write a message where the reason that was given was anti-Semitism. And I, again, like I've done here, acknowledged that that is a very bad thing to have, and that bad things happen in UCLA. We're not denying that, we're owning that, and we are owning that and correcting it. But those, both that initial one and then the subsequent 2, simply refer to the events that happened now 2 years ago and say nothing about what's happened. Even before I arrived, in the summer following the encampments, already the University of California as a system revised its time, place, and manner and started taking action. But certainly since I started, it's everything. It's been my #1 priority. I actually ran just a word search when I get those documents from the Department of Justice to see if my name appears anywhere. And, I don't exist, right? And everything we have done doesn't exist. So what I can tell you is we are going to continue to make the case that if the federal government is sincere about the fight against anti-Semitism, they will not find a stronger ally in any university than in UCLA. If, however, that's a mere excuse because there's for example, cancel grants, that we can't accept, and I don't think as a society we should accept. Anti-Semitism is a very, very serious problem, and we have to address it. But cutting research on cancer, on other diseases, on our fantastic physicists who are advancing quantum computing, that has nothing to do, that doesn't solve or address that problem. In fact, it makes it worse. Because now people start saying, you see, if the Jews didn't complain so much, they wouldn't have canceled my grant. And also, by the way, we happen to be a pretty brainy community, so a very large number of the researchers whose grants were canceled happen to be Jewish. And many are members of the Faculty Resilience Action Group that was mentioned before. So, there's no connection between the supposed sin, which we recognize and we are addressing, and the action. So that's been the conversation we're having. We did have no choice but to actually through faculty members who filed a lawsuit against the cancellation of the 800 grants. And fortunately, we got a very favorable ruling, which the federal government has not, at least not yet, challenged or appealed. And so the 800 grants, totaling $580 million, have been restored. So that's where we are on that.
So let me slip in a quick question before we take one or two final ones, which is, Berkeley adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Do you think that UCLA will or should?
My personal view is it should. And I want to do it in a process that brings the community along, not as a top-down decision. But when I describe the 3 waves of expansion, that is my interpretation of the IRA definition.
Great. Yes, amen. Let's take 2 more, and then.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. My question is as follows. You know how Instagram, we all agree, has brainwashed a lot of the kids, Instagram and TikTok, about Israel being a genocidal state? Do you think the time is right to have like an event with lots of security, to have people that are pro-Palestinian sympathizers and the pro-Israel group to have a civilized debate? Are we ready for that?
So do you think that the university could host debates with pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli students and or faculty?
We're doing that. We are doing that exactly with the right people. There are some people who don't want to talk. Before I arrived, there were 2 task forces, like many universities. I know you had an issue with the one at Harvard. But my predecessor had 2 task forces, one for anti-Semitism and anti-Israel bias, and another for Islamophobia and anti-Muslim and anti-Palestinian. When I came, I met with the chair of the anti-Semitism. In fact, it was the first person I met with. He handed me his report, I read it, and I told him, we're going to do it. It's not going to be a report that's going to be on a shelf. And that's what led to the initiative and all the actions that I've described. I reached out to the other task force. They refused to talk to me. So, there are some people who don't want to talk. But the vast majority of people in the community do want to talk, and we have something called dialogue across differences. And through that mechanism, we have actually had, not as groups, but actual just human beings, individuals, sharing stories, trying to find some common ground. And I mean, if you ask me, what is the single most important thing that we need to make sure every student, not just at UCLA, but at every university, graduates with? I would tell you, in this current climate of polarization, it's the ability to disagree respectfully, to engage. The problem is not to disagree, it's to do it with respect.
I want to thank you first for coming and speaking to us. I also want to share an experience. I have 2 sons. One graduated in 2024, and my youngest one is finishing his 2nd year at UCLA. In 2024, during the encampment, my oldest son was experiencing extreme pain in one leg, and he was advised by his doctor to stay off that leg. And one day he had to take a computer back to library. He asked me to drive him so he could take his computer back to the library. My son is not political, but he always proudly wears the Star of David. And this was especially in 2024 after what had happened on October 7th. So I drove him close to the library. He told me he would be gone for 15 minutes. And I waited for him. Half an hour later, he was not back. 45 minutes later, he was not back. An hour later, he was not back. I called him and he said, "Mom, I cannot get through the encampment to return the computer." He came back an hour and a half later in the car, sitting and crying, my 21-year-old son, from excruciating pain, which we later found out was not because he was so athletic. Few months later, ultimately, the doctors at UCLA saved his life. but he had to experience excruciating pain for wanting to return a
And do you
computer
have-
for
do you-
being
and
Jewish.
That's an awful experience. Do you have a question, or you don't have a question?
No, I wanted to share that experience.
Last
so you
question
would
then
be-
in the corner.
I'm very sorry to hear that that happened to your son, and please tell him that it will never happen again.
Okay.
And if he would like, if it would help to come and speak to us and share, the doors are always open.
This is a wonderful format, and I would love to see more of these types of symposiums here after the services. I looked into the idea of why the college campuses have become breeding grounds for anti-Semitism. And I thought this is a rather recent event for the past several decades. What I realized is that the problem has been ongoing since the 20th century, that how colleges engineered special programs to exclude the Jewish population. So this anti-Semitism goes to the DNA of all these universities in the US.
Is there a question?
Yes. What if we were to implement a new program that would have a standard set of rules and objectives for all of the universities to follow and to adhere to? Because
Yeah.
anti-Semitism is not a...
Let me just, I just want to add, you're right, but there have been dips and valleys. That is, in the 20s, 30s, 40s, there were quotas. By the time I was growing up, actually, the quotas effectively did not exist. I went to Penn when it was 33% to 40% Jewish. The same thing was true at Harvard. What you're seeing now is a retrenchment. It's not that it's been a steady same, but anyway, so what can we do about the return of the repressed?
Well, I mean, UC's president chose a leader knowing that there was a certain background, right? And that maybe I would go along and help a little bit if I could. So there are spaces where there's a deliberate choice to be able to have Jewish values in leadership and in the way that the campus operates. I have been blessed to never have felt that my career or my work was blocked because of my religion, but that's obviously not where I came from. And I know we're close to closing, so I just wanted to share, one thing about, how personal this is for us. So 18 years ago, we know this is a very important number, a high. 18 years ago, I was saved from my breast cancer by a medicine that was developed at UCLA. 18 years later, we have the blessing of being able to work at this institution to make sure that it can continue to generate the science that will save lives of many people, whoever they are. This is a huge blessing as well as a responsibility. And we appreciate all of the feedback that will help us to continue to do this in the best way we can. It's a painful road. When I read that letter, I cried. For maybe the first time that I had ever cried about anti-Semitism, other than what my father went through. So we can't say enough about how much we appreciate how the community has brought us in, and especially certain individuals who have had us in their home, who have showed us. I had never been to a Passover or a Rosh Hashanah where anyone was going to hit me with an onion until Soraya took us to her house. So it has been incredible how we have been brought in by this community and has made a lot of, I think, what we've done possible. And we'll let you continue to hit us with onions anytime you need to. So.
Well, on this point, Felicia did speak for me.
I want to conclude. I know that there are many people who didn't get to ask questions. I'm sorry. I want to conclude with two things. First of all, by just recalling the last two doctors of UCLA who have both passed away, but were members of this congregation. It's why I actually had the chance to open the hospital with a dedication, and that was Gerald and Barbara Levy, who were treasured members of our community. Both doctors at UCLA, wonderful people. And Dr. Levy always used to say, just do the right thing. That it actually, in the end, it will prove to be beneficial if you just do the right thing. He used to say that to donors, and that's how he built the UCLA hospital. It's not easy to get away, especially on a Shabbat, from the pressing responsibilities of running a university, which are innumerable, to come and speak to a synagogue. And so we are so enormously grateful to both of you for doing this. And we want you to know that if you need a community behind you, we are behind you. So God bless you both, and Shabbat Shalom.